Kirkland's is one of my favorite websites to look at for inspiration for different pieces of home decor. With a few things from the Dollar Tree, I'm going to show you how you can achieve that high-end look at a fraction of the cost. I love using risers in my home's decor, and when I saw this one on the Kirkland's website, I love that it was a black galvanized metal rather than the traditional gray. From the Dollar Tree, I grabbed a pack of the stove covers. There's 2 in a pack in 2 different sizes. And then in the glassware section, I browsed around until I found a glass that I liked to act as the base of my riser. Since there were 2 different sizes of stove covers in this pack, I tested out both of them with my glass to see which one I liked better, but in the end, I decided to go with the bigger one. Now, because this is a metal stove cover and I'm adhering it to a piece of glass, I'm going to be using my E6000 glue and some hot glue for that long-term, short-term hold. In my last video, I got a lot of questions about this key that I have on my E6000 tube. I get these from Amazon. They're fairly inexpensive, and it makes using the E6000 a lot easier because you can twist it down like you would a tube of toothpaste, and then once you have the glue out that you need, you just twist it backwards a little bit, and it helps suck that glue back up in so it doesn't create a mess, which, you know, if you've used E6000 before, those tubes are notorious for just oozing and oozing and oozing. So being able to suck it back in really makes a big difference. So once I had both of my glues on my glass, I turned my stove cover upside down, and it was easier for me to work with the glass being pressed down onto the stove cover rather than the other way around, and I just did my best to make sure that it was in the center. I already had this black chalkboard paint on hand, but any type of matte black paint will work for this project. You could use spray paint like I am, or you could use chalk paint. Anything that has a matte finish is what you want to use as your first layer. You can see here that I have a nice even coverage all over my riser. I was lucky I got away with just doing 1 coat of that spray paint. To create that galvanized look, I cut a piece of sponge, and on the one end, I ripped some of the pieces off so that it wouldn't have a perfectly square shape to it. It would have a little bit more of a texture. The second layer of paint that I'm going to do on my riser is also a black color, but it's a metallic finish. This one's by Deco Art. I got it from Michael's, and the color is called Obsidian. I started applying that paint with that sponge that I had cut up, and as I was putting it all over the surface, I tried to turn it in a few different directions so that it didn't look like just squares all over the surface of the riser. Now, I have to say, I love how this paint job came out. I love that tone on tone black galvanized look. I think it's just such a cool looking riser. I really want to try painting it on a bunch of different things. And one tip I have is if you are a person that maybe sets up at crafts fairs or things like that, this would be a great way to display some of your items. I think it would give it such a unique look at your booth if you had a bunch of different risers and boxes and shelves and things all with this black galvanized paint job. I think it would look really eye-catching at a craft fair. At $38, these pillar candle holders were a little too expensive for me. So from the Dollar Tree, I grabbed 2 of the glass bowls, and I also picked out 2 glass vases that fit at the base of the bowls. The best way to attach a piece of glass to another piece of glass is by using the E6000 hot glue combo. So once again, I'm adding E6000 around the base of the vase and a little bit of hot glue in the center, and then I'm just placing the bowl on top of it. I'm taking advantage of the warm weather, and I'm spray painting as much as I can. So for these pieces, I'm using a paint by Rust-Oleum, and this is a high gloss finish in the color white. I think this paint has such a good coverage. I was able to get away with just doing 1 coat of this paint. I wanted to test out my painter's tape before I started putting it on for the color blocking. So inside the bowl, I laid a piece of tape down and I rubbed it fairly hard to make sure that it wouldn't pull up any of that spray paint before I started moving on to the body of the vase. Now, I did let this spray paint dry for almost a full day just to make sure that it had a really good coverage and that it wouldn't lift up by the tape. I wanted to kind of mimic the pattern that was on the Kirkland's vase, so I just started laying my tape down in a diagonal pattern until I had it blocked off how I thought I would like it. And for the second vase, because I knew there was no way I was going to match up and have it be exactly the same, I did the same pattern, but I moved it down lower on the vase so that when they were sitting side by side, they would look like they went together, but they weren't going to be exactly the same. So you can see the second vase, the pattern is the same, but it's much lower on the vase, so I didn't have to stress about getting them exact. Now, the great thing about DIYing your own home decor is you can change up the colors to however you liked. So for mine, I wanted to give mine a green bottom rather than the peach color that the Kirkland's had. And because I wanted to add a little more texture to mine, I'm actually using chalk paint for the base of mine rather than another high gloss paint, because I really like the look of that matte flat chalk paint up against the high gloss spray paint. So for my first coat of chalk paint, I'm taking my time and I'm pulling downward from the paint tape line so that I decrease the risk of having any of that paint seep up through the tape. I was just pulling it down to make sure that it was nice and even and nothing was going up underneath it. After my first coat of chalk paint had dried, I went back in with a second coat, and I really wanted to even out some of the brush strokes that I could see from that first coat. So I'm using a chippy brush here, and rather than painting it on in strokes like I did the first coat, I'm going in an up and down motion, kind of like you're stippling on if you're going to do a stencil or something like that. This just helps even out any of the brush strokes that you might see, and it's also going to give a little bit of extra texture because some of that texture from pouncing it on there is going to stay even after the paint dries. So once I had the whole thing covered with my second coat of paint, I went ahead and removed that painter's tape. And because I had really taken my time with that first coat, making sure that I was pulling away from the tape rather than going up towards it, I had a nice crisp line on my vase. If you don't have time to DIY, grab some of these woven baskets from the Dollar Tree. They look really similar to some of these cord wrap baskets from Kirkland's. All you have to do is add some rocks or moss and a succulent, and you have a really great display of home decor. Rather than recreating this look from Kirkland's, I'm using it as inspiration for a wreath. From the Dollar Tree, I grabbed a pack of their brass wreath rings. This is a 3-pack, and there's 3 different sizes in each pack. For Michael's, I grabbed a bag of raffia that I was going to wrap around it, but then I headed over to the gift wrap section and I was able to find this raffia paper ribbon roll. It's a little pricey at $7.49, but in the app on my phone, I had a 30% off coupon, making it just $5.24. And it's a big roll. There's 75 yards on it, so I'll be able to create a lot of projects with it. To get started, I laid all 3 of my rings together on top of my silicone mat so that I could attach all of them together. I laid them out from largest to smallest, and I tucked all of them up against one side because, like I said, I'm using that piece from Kirkland's as inspiration. I'm not duping it exactly. So once I had all 3 of my rings stacked together, I cut down a piece of craft stick and I just used some hot glue, and I hot glued that over where all 3 of those rings met. And I held that in place until it was good and set. And then I flipped it over and I did the same thing on the back. I added a bunch of hot glue and laid a piece of craft stick over it so that the rings would be sandwiched in between the 2 craft sticks. I started where those 2 craft sticks were, and I just started wrapping some of this paper raffia ribbon around everything. Now, once I got to the part where all of the rings started separating, this is where I just started wrapping on the center 2 rings. So as you can see here, I cut some of the ribbon off of the roll because I wouldn't be able to fit it in between the rings. And right as they started separating away from each other, that's whenever I started wrapping just around the center 2. And I did use a little bit bit of hot glue here and there just to help hold that ribbon in place. And as I was wrapping the ribbon around those two center ones, I started spacing it out farther and farther as I got to the bottom of the rings. As I was wrapping my ribbon, I kept it on a diagonal, and you can see here that as I kept wrapping and spacing it out, it created a really cool woven pattern. And the space in between each of the wraps that I was doing was going to come in handy later when I started wrapping the second row. Also keep in mind, you don't have to use this paper raffia ribbon if you want to recreate this. I think it would look really cool too if you used any kind of regular material ribbon or even jute cord or yarn, like one of those really chunky yarns. I think that would look really cool and give it a neat boho feel. I zoomed in here so you could see how I'm going to do the second row. Again, I started out at the top where those craft sticks are, and I cut a length of this paper ribbon and just started in with my hot glue. Now, because I left those spaces on that first row, that's what I'm going to use to space out my second row, and that's how I'm going to join the two together. So you can see here, as I'm wrapping this around, I'm feeding it through the space on the first row, and I'm staying in that same diagonal shape so that it crisscrosses back on itself and gives it a really cool woven look. And now that it's being woven into the first row, it's really creating a neat pattern. One thing to keep in mind as you're wrapping this ribbon, or any ribbon that you choose, is just keep it really flat, and anytime that it twists, just make sure that you're twisting it back so that it lays nice and flat. As I got towards the bottom where the spacing got a little bit bigger, sometimes I would place two wraps inside of the first row rather than just one. And I also wanted to show you here too, as I got to the end of my ribbon, I just added a little bit of hot glue and I laid the next ribbon right on top of it, cut another piece off, and kept weaving my way around. Weaving the second row into the first row really made this feel a lot sturdier also. Now, like I said earlier, I'm using this Kirkland's piece just as inspiration. I know that it's a freestanding piece of home decor, but I'm going to create a wreath instead. So I gathered up a couple pieces of greenery and some flowers that I had in my stash, and I just created a simple swag by clipping them all off the bunch and putting all of the stems toward the center, and I'm holding it in place with some clear tape. Then I got some striped ribbon out of my stash, and I just created a really simple one loop bow, and I tied that onto my swag. Now, what you could do here is just tie the bow and the swag right onto the wreath, and you could change it out for the different seasons. But because I have so much of that paper ribbon in my stash, I decided to go ahead and just glue my bow right to the top of my wreath. Much for coming to hang out with me again today. I hope you're having a great summer. Let me know in the comments how you've been. All right, everyone, have a great week, and I'll talk to you in the next one.